Hello. Welcome to Android Developer Office Hours for October 17th, 2012. I'm pretty sure I have that date, right?
Yeah.
Good. Sorry for the delayed start. For those of you who are watching live, we've had a few technical difficulties in our studio this morning, but we're ready to go. So, for those of you who are joining us for the first time this week, we're going to spend the next 30 minutes or hour or however long it takes to go and answer your questions on Android development topics. We have a moderator queue where people have been submitting questions before the show. We'll be going through those questions, but if you are watching live, feel free to jump onto our Google Plus Hangout, where you can go ahead and ask us questions live. And we'll go ahead and interleave live questions in between the pre-recorded questions on Google Moderator. So, with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started on the first question on Moderator today. So, this question is from Australia, and I think the name there is Jay Dixon. You'll have to forgive me if I'm getting that name wrong. It seems impossible to query my in-app purchase prices from the store using the API. Ideally, I want to display localized prices for my in-app purchases to my users. How can I do this without creating a lot of mess and bundling prices for each
locale?
Locale, thank you. All right. So, Alex, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Unfortunately, from what I remember, it's not possible to query localized prices. Part of the reason for that is that the currency exchange rates are sort of constantly fluctuating, and we don't want to create a situation where you display one price in your application, and then when they go to the when they go through the purchase flow through Google Play, the currency exchange shift happens and they get charged a higher price.
Well, I think actually you can record per country prices. So if you are recording I think the old model would do live currency conversion. But on the new one, you set all your prices for every product simultaneously.
Right. I think what they wanted, at least from what I'm reading from the question, they want to set it once for one locale and sort of pull in live data on the price for each locale. But like Trevor said, I think what you can do is set the price individually for each locale, which is what I think you would have to do in this case. If you want to create a situation where you are updating the price over time, say an in-app gold or potions or something cost $1 and you want to drop to 50 cents or however you want to do that, what you would have to do then is set the pricing up on your own server, and then on application start, just have it ping the server, check for new prices to display within the app, or use something like Google Cloud Messaging to ping the application whenever there's a price change, and then it can pull that data down off the server.
Right. We do have a batch upload API for prices, so if you take all of your prices and put them into a CSV file, you can send those to the Google Play developer console, and then you can serve that same CSV to your app, and then they'd both be working off the same pricing data.
Yeah. All
right. So let's move on to the next question.
All right.
This one is from Rado Meyer, our own Rado Meyer here in Mountain View, California. We're going to go and try and do a video question for this, but I don't think it's going to work too well. So we're just going to go ahead and, unless Lewis over here wants to go and try and pull it up live, but I think we're just going to go ahead and read this one out this week. So the question is, Dice Player, which was a app that was featured last week actually on the one of the app review shows, displays a pop-out window, and it plays video even when the app is running, or when the app's running in the background. So, and you can sort of drag it around. It's actually a really interesting effect if you want to go ahead and download the app on your own and take a look at it. But the question is, how does that work, and is it something that's going to break in future releases? So, and I believe, Alex, you found a library that actually lets you do this.
Yeah, so there's a library available. It's an open source library called Standout that basically it's a third-party library that lets you create little floating windows you can drag around on your home screen. And it's even got this, it's a pretty nifty-looking always-on-top functionality where you can even open other apps and the Standout window will sort of float on top of it. So this actually works. So Dice Player is using this library, Standout. And Standout actually works by using a system alert dialog. In terms of will this break in future releases, we can't say for sure, but the system alert dialog wasn't designed with video in mind. So it's sort of an odd use of the system dialog, and I wouldn't expect that to work without some updates per version, like from the developer of the library. Especially difficult would be the context of actually using it to play video the way that Dice Player does. I expect that to break in all sorts of corner cases unless the developer's been really careful about that kind of thing. For instance, playing simultaneously or playing a floating video window on top of a application that's playing other video. There's serious resource allocation considerations there.
And yeah, I think that pretty much covers like from a UI perspective. It's definitely an interesting effect, but
yeah.
It's not really the Android way of doing things.
Right. It's having a window that you can drag around sort of breaks the only in one application at a time UI paradigm that we go for with Android. It is a neat effect, and it's impressive that the standout library is impressive in terms of what they've accomplished, but I would say it should be used with care.
Right. All right. Let's move on to our third question. So. Another question from Jay Dixon in Australia. And so the question is, with in-app purchases on Google Play, is there an easy way to offer discounts for a Play account across all of our in-app purchases? Or would I have to write and manage this? So we don't really have a way to go, and actually we really don't have much of a way to offer discounts, period. Right. You could go and upload a different set of prices if you were say applying discounts to every product in your in-app catalog. Right, just update all the prices. It should take effect live. But if you only want to target one specific user, we really don't have any way to do that on our end. You'd have to add some code into your application, which is responsible for selecting a different in-app product based on that user. Now, that said, I'm going to give you a big caution here, and that is part of the reason why we have the concept of an in-app product and why you have to upload all your prices to the server is to make sure that if somebody tampers with your APK, they can't go and purchase one product at a different price, right? Imagine that we put the prices into your application's code and you just send them to Google Play. It'd be trivial to go and find that string and replace it with a different price and then get all your content for 99 cents regardless of what you want to buy it for. So in this case, it's a little different in that you're still using a in-app product, but if somebody discovers that you're doing this, they could just go and modify the APK to go and select that different product ID regardless of which user is actually logged into the phone. And so from a security perspective, this is a bit sketchy. So that's the one thing I really do want to warn you about here if you do decide to do this.
Yeah. Well, one alternative might be, I don't know if this would work, but just like playing through the scenario in my head, one thing that might work is to not store the item ID for the discounted version of the item on the device. Just have it on your server and have the user authenticate to the server. The server sends down the discount item ID.
That would work. There is still a risk. If somebody does find that product ID, there's nothing stopping somebody from going and plugging it in there. But you'd have to actually discover it exists. So
right, you'd have to discover it exists, and you have to maybe mimic the user packet sniff or something to get the item ID.
It is obfuscation, and so all the caveats that come with that apply. But it is if it's just a small discount, you might not really care that much. So, and that being said, the users are still going to have to pay something. So, I don't think it's going to be a big difference.
Right.
So, let's see here. Is there any way to do route between 2 points with the Android Map API? So, and this is coming from Brazil. So, this is essentially driving directions, I believe, in which case the answer is, if you're using map view, no. But if you are using an intent to load maps, I believe it's possible by just using a maps URL.
I think so, yeah. You could just fire an intent with the
it's an
destination.
It's an undocumented feature of maps, essentially. But if you have a URL from driving directions, like you'd get from the desktop version of maps, there's a query parameter for source address and a query parameter for destination address. And if you fire off the intent that looks just like the URL built on the desktop, the Maps application will offer to intercept that and will go and calculate driving directions locally. So, again, not possible with map view, but possible with an intent. So, this question is coming from Andrew in Romania. The question is, with Android Awesome Player, which is part of the video framework, the media playback framework, they're getting an unexpected abort prepare, notify listener of error, which is preventing them from playing an MP4. they're getting this error on Android 2.3.4, and it sounded like it was across several different devices looking at their Stack Overflow question. And the file also, interestingly enough, it works fine when they're playing off of the SD card. So that's really interesting. Normally when you see these types of errors, it's because you've encoded your video to use the wrong format. And I think in this case, what's most likely happening, if you look very carefully at their source, they're actually retrieving the file from an HTTPS server.
Okay.
And I mean, I can't say this for sure without actually having the real URL, which is not present in your question. So if you do have that, feel free to ping us. We can take a closer look at it. But my guess is it's probably an SSL error. Like, the certificate's not trusted.
But why would that happen on the SD card and not in private storage?
No, if it's on the SD card, there's no SSL.
Oh, okay. So other way around. It works except on the SD card.
Right, no, other way around. It works on the SD card. It does not work when they stream from their server.
Okay, so it's an SSL error, and they bypass SSL because it's going to the SD card.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I mean, they're not even, yeah. Now that said, there's nothing in the logs that actually indicates this is an SSL error. This is just my best guess based on the limited logs we have available. If you can actually give us the actual URL to the file, we can do a little bit more diagnostics. But just based on the limited information available, that's our best guess.
Right.
All right. Next question comes from Ryan E. in Utah. I'm developing a resource app, but I have partners that only want to have their customers use a specific version until they've QA'd that application. Is there any way to restrict what version is downloaded from Google Play?
I'm a little confused by what they mean by resource app.
Yeah, that was a little unclear to me too. My guess is it's essentially a APK that provides services to other APKs. So, say the example like OpenTable, right? It has a intent that you can fire off to go and make a reservation, or actually quite possibly something like a theme, right? It could be an APK that just contains resources, which actually would make sense. And then they're going and looking inside that to load it, so to retheme their app. Okay.
Interesting. So to the root question, is there a way to restrict what version is downloadable for a given user? Not really. I mean, you can't say bob@gmail.com only gets to see version 3 and not version 4 or anything like that.
Even more generally, it's not even you can't restrict the version, period. When you download an app from Google Play, you always get the latest version. Sort of.
I mean, you do have the option of using multiple APK, and what that would let you do is restrict per user based on the, like, let's say the platform version or the size of the screen. So what you would then do is break your APK up into like 3 different versions. For instance, let's call them like 9, 10, and 11, and say version 10 only works with phone devices, and version 11 is compatible with X large devices, which would include tablets. Then when the user went to market, they would see version 11 if they were on a tablet, and they would see version 10 if they were on a phone. Multiple APKs they don't work for every situation. They will only let you restrict based on the platform SDK platform SDK, screen size, and GL texture. So you can't do a thing like I said before, like say bob@gmail.com gets to see version 11 and everyone else gets to see version 10. So it depends on what criteria you would want to restrict on. I'm guessing from the content of the question that you would want to restrict on the version of the other app. So, the version of application A that's installed on the user system would define what version of application B was visible. And that's not really currently possible. Google Play wasn't really designed to work like that. You would probably have to either implement some sort of like very well-defined interface between the two applications and just test the living crap out of it until you're reasonably confident that you can upgrade one of those without breaking the other one, or you'd have to release them in tandem, or have a side-loading thing where I take that back. It is against the Google Play TOC to have an application that downloads other applications.
Right.
So you wouldn't be able to do anything like that. It would really have to be a very well-defined and thoroughly tested interface between the two applications.
All right. So just one last reminder here. We are getting to the end of our pre-recorded questions for this week. So if you do have any questions that you want to ask us live, feel free to hop on to Google+. Even if you don't have a webcam, we can accept questions via chat. but you have about probably 2 minutes before we're out of questions and we'll be signing off for the day. So this question comes from Andy C. in Perth, Australia, who says, I have a requirement to convert PCM files to AAC or MPEG-4 files. Can we have some demo code for mode codec encoding, please? All right. So that's a pretty big question there. Like, you want to go and convert from one file format to another. I don't think we have any published sample code that demonstrates how to do this.
No, that's generally when we write sample code, it's and we publish like official Android sample code. It's for general purpose stuff that's specific to the Android framework that there's a reasonable assumption that a lot of Android developers are going to want, and it's something specific to Android. This is pretty independent of the fact that it would be running on Android. Generally, what you would want to do is find a good transcoding Java library.
Yeah, well, they did mention they'd looked at FFmpeg, which is actually a pretty good choice.
It is a good choice.
It's actually LGPL licensed too. So
okay.
Actually, I believe it's dual licensed, LGPL and GPL. There were some licensing concerns from the developer. I'm afraid we can't actually speak to those since we're not legal experts.
Right.
But usually LGPL is pretty permissive of it's designed to be used as a library, so you can usually include it in other code. I think there were some cases, depending on which codec you used, the licensing status changed.
Yeah, from what I remember with LGPL, the rule was you could include it with your code.
Well, yeah.
It wouldn't force you to GPL your code if you didn't make changes to the LGPL library.
Right, but I think that there are some specific cases here where it's only GPL licensed.
Oh, okay.
So if you do use FFmpeg, be a bit careful with the license there. The FFmpeg developers do have a page dedicated to discussing the license, so they explained it in great detail. But outside of that, another option you could do would be to go and set up a web service that's responsible for transcoding, and so that way you just have a copy of FFmpeg or whatever service you need that'll do the transcoding on your server and then give back the resulting file, which is actually an interesting question there, because you're trading off on-device CPU to do it versus network bandwidth, right? Does it make more sense to use the device's limited CPU to do the transcoding, or to upload it somewhere else and have it do both? Now, you're doing transcoding on the device will waste battery, but a lot of users also have limited network capability.
But also, depending on the size of the file, you could also burn through the battery. I mean, the issue with uploading and then downloading is that you would be paying the price and bandwidth twice.
Yeah.
You'd only transcode once, but you'd have to upload a giant file.
Transcoding on the device probably does make the most sense here.
Probably. I think I would probably, with this kind of question, I would say just like run some tests, and part of it depends on the common use case. Like, are you transcoding, a 3-second video of a, kitten playing with a ball of yarn, or like a full-length movie? Because different cases are going to have different ideal ways to handle them.
Yep. All right, and we still don't have anybody on our live Hangouts. So with that, that's the end of our questions for today. Thank you to everyone who wrote in. We're here every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Pacific Time answering your questions. Please, if you do have a question, submit it to moderator ahead of time. We can go and get you the best answers if the questions don't come in an hour before the show. I'll also add that we're trying to do something new. We tried to do it with Rado's video this week. We'll be doing it next week as well, too. Next week we'll actually be able to show the video. But we want to go and have as many of the questions in Moderator have videos attached to them as possible. So when you do submit your questions, there's now a new field in Moderator that says attach YouTube video, and you just paste a URL to a pre-recorded video from YouTube there. It's not required. You're still welcome to submit questions the old-fashioned way with text. But if you do have a webcam and want to take 30 seconds to go and record your question, we'd love to see your face on the air. So please give it a try, and as always, let us know how it works. You can reach us via our Google Plus page, which is Android Developers, or developers.android.com/plus is the shortcut URL to get there. And with that, I think that's it for this week.
Yep.
All right. So thanks everyone for joining us, and again, we'll be back next Wednesday.
Cool.
Happy coding.